This last section covers economic systems. I'm going to go through this part fairly quickly to get toward to bring up a case at the end. Given the economic problem, that is scarcity and unlimited wants, how do complex societies go about answering the three basic economic questions? You'll want to think back to those first most basic cases we looked at, the Robinson Crusoe case and then the case of a two-person economy, to consider how what's to be produced, how is it to be produced, and who gets it, how those questions are answered under those circumstances. It's the role of an economic system to determine how these three questions are answered. In a command economy, a central authority draws up a plan that establishes what will be produced, when, how, where, and to whom goods will be distributed. Control is concentrated, and you think of this probably as associated with the old Soviet system, or Maoist China, or Venezuela, Cuba in days gone by. Free markets, on the other hand, mean that the market, that people working without government hindrance or engagement, or at least minimal engagement, make the decisions. Control is dispersed in that people are acting as agents for themselves, and ownership of the means of production are in the hands of the people. A market system is characterized by what we call consumer sovereignty. You know, we say the customer is always right, or the customer is king. Of course, the customer is not always right, but the customer is always the customer. What is sold is determined first of all by what consumers want, and you can't force people to buy something they don't want. It's probably one of those beliefs some people have that that through slick advertising people can be made to want things they don't otherwise wouldn't want, and to spend their money on that. People who make that claim don't include themselves, by the way, in that they're smarter. They believe they're not influenced, but they're standing up for the weaker-minded people who don't have the smarts that they have. One thing that's great about of course, the free market system is that it is focused on solving others' problems. It's focused on giving people what they want, and it's not just the consumer. When we had the coffee shop, Cafe Siena, we started that, my son and I, back in 2008. We ran that for 2 years till he went into the Air Force officer training program. And I came up with this way of phrasing it. I realized then that as a business person in a competitive economy, I cannot make anyone buy from me, sell to me, work for me, lend me money, invest in my business, or otherwise deal favorably with me. The only way I can get you to do what I want is doing something you want in exchange. And in that sense, the natural self-interest that we all possess in a market economy is actually projected outward. In order to benefit myself, I have to think about what you want. And there's a lot to appreciate about that many people, it seems like, don't. The profit motive drives producers to seek to meet the wants of the market. It also forces producers to seek the most efficient means of production and distribution. Next chapter, when we talk about supply and demand, I'll say then that suppliers of a good focused on profit, will sell more goods at higher selling prices than at lower selling prices. We'll see something of that. It's just basically emphasizes or introduces the notion that suppliers of a good are focused on profit. In a free market, the price of a good tells a whole lot about the opportunities that exist in that market to produce more goods. Rising prices, for instance, encourage producers of a good to allocate resources to selling those products where the profit potential is greater. And so in that sense, they end up satisfying demand for the product, which actually helps bring prices down, as we'll see. Rising prices of a good imply that demand is increasing relative to supply, and that induces producers to produce more of them in pursuit of profits. The price of a good reflects the cost to the buyer and the benefit to the seller. And so, in fact, you think about going to a store like Publix and buying a gallon of milk for $3.50. When I go in there and give my $3.50 to Publix, they give me the milk. It's because I value the milk more than I value the $3.50. they value the $3.50 more than they value the gallon of milk. And so we both win, which is why we very often see people exhibiting or articulating that what's called the double thank you. You know, the seller says, thank you, come again, and the buyer says, thank you, because they both are better off by that trade. So where's the exploitation? Who's the loser here if, in fact, both are voluntarily engaging in it? In free markets, goods are allocated according to the price system, the law of supply and demand, which we cover in a later chapter. Mixed economies, and in fact, all real economies are mixed. Think of a spectrum where we have economies at one end, and we have the free market economy at the other. Even the U.S. Is highly interventionist. The government intervenes in a number of ways with regulations and price supports and maximum and minimum prices, minimum wage laws, for instance, and other things. Yet the economy is interventionist, but characterized by more economic freedom in some ways than, say, Sweden is, although I have to qualify that. Every year the Heritage Institute puts out an economic freedom index, and it lists countries by the amount of freedom, economic freedom, or freedom that their economy exhibits. And the U.S. is usually about number 10 or 11. Up at the top are, say, Denmark, which is a Scandinavian economy that supposedly has high taxes and high government payouts, government programs. But in fact, they do have private ownership of goods, and they have relatively few regulations, no minimum wage laws, very few restrictions, very easy to start a business, and those sorts of things. So, but anyway, most economies have some measures of intervention. This means greater opportunity for those who succeed economically and less security for those who can't compete. I guess what this is talking about here is a country that has less intervention provides greater opportunity for people to excel economically, but also less security for those who can't measure up to the competition. You know, every society has to choose between what we call ceilings and safety nets. Safety nets represent social programs that help poor people, you know, provide minimum level of education, housing, health care, nutrition, those kinds of things. But that always comes at a price. Somebody has to pay for that ultimately. And so the higher the safety nets, the more the public supports, the lower the ceiling. In other words, the less high anyone can rise, because higher taxes have to be imposed in order to provide those benefits. Some argue that there are inefficiencies in free market economies because the market may not produce all the goods that people want and are willing to pay for, even some things that people say they need. Things like public goods, parks, libraries, museums. People might say that we need those things, and if we just allowed people to buy the things, pay for things they valued, we might not have an adequate police force. We might not have museums and parks and libraries and things like that. There's a very famous saying, I'm trying to remember if it was Victor Hugo or who it was, Voltaire or someone who said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Centralization of control means concentration of power, and that's why, for the most part in the U.S., a capitalist system is the power is dispersed among, and the ownership of property is dispersed. So the power is dispersed, whereas in a centralized economy, power is concentrated, and there is a tremendous opportunity for abuse of that, as well as the problems associated with inefficiencies. In a society, we have to ask questions about, what right we have to exert pressure on others to get them to do things that are good for them. For instance, to require that people support museums or provide public health care so that those who can't afford it can have health care. We have seatbelt laws. We require immunization. We have public education, and children up to a certain age are required to attend school. We don't have state-supported churches in the U.S., but they do in the U.K. and other countries. I would say here I'm a great respecter of free markets, and am continually fascinated by the variety of products and services and the quality of those things that are provided in free markets that you don't see just routinely around the world. At the same time, we need to beware the altar of the free market. There are things that traded within free markets that are unconscionable. Child pornography, for instance, slavery, illicit drugs, prostitution, those sorts of things. We could argue that an unfettered market would provide for all of those things. So we need to be careful before we simply say that whatever a free market produces must be good. That there are certainly some things. We live in a fallen world, and some things that a market economy, an unfettered market, might produce that in fact we would find detestable and detrimental to society overall. So these are tough questions that societies have to answer, as to what degree to restrict people in the exercise of their own personal liberty. There's a question here that's worth looking at, and I'm going to just lay it out for you and then let you think about it. Picture yourself in 2001 in the aftermath of the attack on the World Trade Center in the Pentagon. You're a gas station attendant with a long line of customers. You have only 100 gallons of gas left in your supply tank. 10 cars are lined up, and each wants 15 gallons. How do you allocate your supply, and what are the alternatives? Well, first come, first serve would probably be the easiest one, but that means that those 10 cars, the seventh car is going to exhaust your supply. In other words, you've got a limited number of gallons there, and if everybody gets what they want, then you're going to run out of gas pretty quickly. And so you may find that some people very deserving, in great need, possibly, even emergency vehicles wouldn't be able to get them. This places a high value on being first in line. How about need? Ask all the drivers what their intended purpose is, establish criteria for evaluating need. This provides incentives for drivers to be, or at least to appear to be, needy. How about equal distribution? How about if you simply say, well, there's 10 of you in line, 100 gallons. I know some of you want 15. Nope, everybody gets 10 gallons. Well, that would work, but what if another car or two drives up? Then you've got to, how are you going to handle that? Cronyism. How about if you just say, okay, who's a regular customer here? Or who do I know in this group? And so you allocate based on those kind of personal associations. Open conflict. How about just survival of the fittest? You could have a mud wrestling competition, or just let people duke it out, or whoever happens to have the most guns. And this is what happens when a society's institutional structures break down, when they're so weak, or it's so unfair and unjust that people simply become vigilantes. They take matters into their own hands. Or number 6, an auction. The gas goes to the highest bidder. You have to have enough money to buy the desired quantities. Now, here's how that, for the most part, went down in most gas stations during this period of time. For the most part, the gas stations raised their prices pretty significantly during that time, and so, in fact, the market price, as the price went up, it served to allocate that. People didn't buy as much gas as they otherwise would, and of course, a lot of people squawked about that, because they said they're making all kinds of money off this. There's some other issues there about the cost of the gas. But anyway, one thing I'll leave you with this, because I'm about to run out of time here, is this. The last question, which method prevails in a free market economy? It's actually that number 6. That is, gas is auctioned to the highest bidders. And the advantage of that method over all the others is that by selling to the highest bidder, then you reap a higher price, which encourages, in fact, the seller of the good to find more of that product. It encourages, on the basis of seeking profit, the seller of the good to try